What's up, everybody? This is A7X Fan Ben, and this is how I make ship artwork in Inkscape using my master artwork templates. So this is the second video in a 3-video series about how this all comes together. I just want to say up front, I'm not an Inkscape pro or anything. I've learned it pretty much exclusively to design Pirate CSG cards and whatnot. I'm not a pro at it or anything. This is just a tutorial on how to make ship artwork using my Inkscape artwork templates. And there's going to be a link in the description to all of them. I have them all in a Google Drive folder. So all the ones that are finished, you can see them and download them there. And if you want more Inkscape like general tutorials for general knowledge and whatnot, I have a couple really good YouTube channels to recommend. The first one is Logos by Nick, and the second one is TJ Free. And I'm going to have links to both of their Inkscape tutorial playlists in the description. So if you want to learn it a little bit more from the ground up, you can check those out. So those channels are both highly recommended. And those are the ones I've used the most in my learning process throughout 2024 so far. And so we're going to start. This is basically the 1MS, stands for One Masted Sloop artwork template. So the file name will differ from what you have. Basically, the files in the Google Drive folder, they generally have images embedded, not linked. Normally, it's best to have images linked in these files because once Inkscape gets over about 5 megabytes per file, sometimes you have lag. But for me to share them, it's better to have the images embedded, because if not, you would see, like, instead of this flag here, this American flag, for example, you'd see like a big red X with like a white outline or whatever. So then if you go in here under object attributes, you can see that this is linked to a location on my computer. So it's linked to a folder on my computer. So it's just linked locally instead of embedded. And then of course you can embed it, and you can also embed all images at once, but that's usually something I do before I finish a template and then share it. So I'm just going to kind of go from the start. So Mastaba is the name of this file. So I basically I opened the One Masted Sloop 1MS master artwork template, and then I went to File, Save a Copy. I've seen online from multiple sources that I guess that's better than using Save As. So I recommend using Save a Copy, and then that'll keep the original template as a separate file in your computer, and then you can save a copy. And then after that, you can rename the copy to, the ship name or whatever you want to name it. So basically this one it's going to end up being a cursed one master for my Pirates of the Epic Seas custom set that I'm doing as initially part of a Halloween release, as part of like a cursed mega pack product idea that I've had. So we're just going to start right away. And whenever you click on an object, you'll see that it highlights over on the right in the layers panel. So the layers panel is the primary panel that I work with over on the right. So there's a lot of things you can do with this. You can change the size of it. You can dock, undock. If you click once by these 3 dots, it actually hides the entire thing. I usually like to have it open, but minimized in horizontal size. But this is basically, the minimum size is based on all these little minimized tabs that I have up here. But I like to keep all these up because usually I usually use most of them when I'm making ship artwork. Not always trace bitmap, but usually I use most of those throughout the process of creating a ship. So, and especially layers. So if you don't see that one, you can go up to layers and then hit layers and objects, and then you'll be able to see that tab on the right or wherever you have your panels over here. And then there's all kinds of display options there. And then there's also, if you go to edit preferences, that's where things get pretty interesting and pretty in-depth. Usually I'm not going to get too hardcore into that. I do like to have the buttons be a little bit bigger, and I think you can make these buttons on the left and top toolbars a little bit more colorful as well. So, but anyway, so we get into the ship here. I'm just going to kind of go naturally as if I'm just making the ship from scratch. So I've got the template, and so I'm just going to double click. Sometimes you have to kind of triple click, and then I'm just going to go in there. A lot of times you'll see these little slight glitches where you see there's a little bit of the old S there on top, but as soon as you zoom out or zoom in a tiny bit, it pretty much always goes away. So not a big deal. And then we've got the faction flag over here. So stats, that layer over on the right, these are all the different layers. And basically the stats layer, I use that for almost anything that can affect the ship in gameplay or even in terms of collecting too. Like I have the collector's numbers in the stats layer too. So stats is basically anything that's not just artwork or the card background or the outlines. So the cut outlines I have on top because I want them to always be visible generally, because they're really useful as a reference. So the cut outlines I divided into full shape outlines, the decal outlines, and the card outlines. And eventually I might have a fourth one for laser cut outlines, or I might just replace full shape outlines with that one. I'm not totally sure yet. A lot of the ship shapes are laser cutting is still in progress as of recording this video. So the templates, the master artwork templates, they will probably be, some of them will be updated and some of them will be slightly variable. Like some of the later artwork templates I make might have laser cut outlines and the earlier ones might not. And then I might update the old ones. I just don't know yet. So basically the cut outlines, I like to keep those really thin. You can see at the bottom left under stroke width is 0.05 millimeters. That's partly because there are some laser cutters that require the stroke width to be exactly that. They require not only the stroke width to be exactly 0.05 millimeters, but also what some people call 255 red, which is basically if you go to, so this is under fill and stroke, which is one of the panels I have up here. And that's another one you can get up through over here at the top left. So object, fill and stroke. So if you don't see that on your panels on the right, you can click that to bring it up. And then if we go to stroke paint, and then we can see that under the RGB, it's FF and then 4 zeros after that. And there's all sorts of different colors, color wheels and options. So this one right now is basically 255 red. It's like a pure red, no red or green, no transparency, completely not opaque at all. So that's kind of how the laser cut outlines are. It's good to work with them like that. And then the card outlines I have the same generally. The decal outlines are for me, unless you're able to make decals as well and then put them onto like 3D printed ships. You'll see the decal outlines are white. They're the same stroke width just to keep it simple and have all the outlines be 0.05 millimeters. But these ones you can see they're cut. They don't extend into the tabs. And that's because if you put together a ship that has decals out on it, it'll basically thicken the piece so that then the parts don't fit into the slots properly. There's usually either decal pinching or overlap, and it's just a mess and it's not worth dealing with. So you could theoretically resize the slots so that then the decal parts will fit in to the wider slots, but in my experience that has not been worth it. And then I would have to, if I wanted to do that now, I would also have to retool a ton of files, which is just silly. It's a lot easier to just cut off the tabs in advance. Like we're going all the way back to the files and just cutting them off at the pass right here. And there's also some spots where it's good to have a little bit of play, basically with the decal outlines. So you'll see they're wider at these slots, both width and lengthwise. And even like where the flag goes in, because sometimes when that flag goes into the stern slot, there's a little bit of overlap where the deck decal, if it's pushed up too far, if it's still right there, the flag might be too loose or it might just not fit in right. And sometimes it'll kind of bunch up the decal a little bit, but usually it's not too bad. So that kind of explains why the decal outlines are separate from the full shape outlines. Ideally, these templates are pretty versatile and you could adapt them for laser cutting or decals to go on 3D printed ships. So that's a good little quick overview of the cut outlines, similar to what I talked about in the first video of this series, which is basically just an overview of the templates. But now we'll get into more specifically how I design the ship artwork from the ground up. But we're still going to start with stats because that's kind of usually how I start, because it just looks weird if you if you start editing this ship to make it like a Curse 1 master, but then it still has, you know, the American flag and the Spanish main background. It just feels really off. So I like to do this first. So one thing that I also want to develop throughout 2024 and hopefully beyond that is like an artwork assets database and a symbols database. And I'll show you kind of how I started that. So if you go up to Object, Symbols, it'll bring up a new thing over here, and you can see that I've already got a folder on my computer that Inkscape references as a symbols folder. So there's a couple of them. I've got one for flat faction flags. I've got one for set icons. Thanks to Arshellen from PSM List for helping me with that one. And then wavy faction flags. And actually, big props to Arshellen for probably all three of these, because they helped me create these folders with those assets. So we're going to do, we just need a flat flag. So we're going to drag in the cursed one. And I think it's usually they're already sized properly to the card. That's how I saved them. They might be a tiny bit off, and sometimes sometimes the flags in the template might not match the symbols, but either way, it's pretty close. So basically what I did there is I dragged the cursed flag. I'm going to undo twice actually. So I dragged the cursed flag into the Inkscape area, and then I like to zoom in with Control, and then if you do your mouse scroll wheel going up, that zooms in, then zoom out, hold Control and scroll out, or scroll down basically. And then one of the most important things to keep in mind is snapping. So up in the top right, we have toggle snapping on and off. I do this on and off all the time. A lot of times it's useful to have things snap, and then there's other times when it's horrible and you just have to turn it off because you need a more precision movement basically, or expansion of an object. So here I want to have it snapped. So then it goes bounding box corner to bounding box corner, and then I can very easily resize the flag. I click on the bottom right, this arrow, I hold Control, I click that, and then it expands proportionally. So then the shape doesn't change. If I let go of Control, I can go way too high or way too wide really easily. You could just have it go like that, so then it's to the edge, to the bottom right edge of the American flag. So now I know that faction flag over in the right here, that was the American flag. So now that one's below and we don't need that anymore, I'm just going to delete that. And then if you want, you can rename this. I'll just put cursed flag. The symbols, unfortunately, they don't, in my experience at least, I don't know if this is an oversight on my end, even when you have the symbols named in the symbols folder, a lot of times they don't carry that name over into the layers panel, unfortunately, but whatever. Pretty easy to rename stuff. That's one of my main keys to organization throughout these templates is almost everything has a name. There are some exceptions, like I'm not going to name every single line of rigging on like the mast, for example, or on the sail and whatnot, but most things, especially like groups and important stuff, pretty much all of them have names. So for example, this one is the point cost. So this is going to be an 8-point ship. So we have 8. So I just double click to get inside that text box, and then I'm going to move it with my arrow keys a little bit just to center it. You can also center so this one's already selected. If I hold shift and click that gray background behind it, that selects point cost box. And then if I go over here to align and distribute, I can then say relative to last selected, which was the gray box, I can align on the vertical axis, and we saw it moved a tiny bit to the left there. So now it's basically centered. It's centered there, and you could center it horizontally, but in this case, obviously we don't want to because we've got the word points there that we want to keep. And then the mass count and cargo is the same. And then this one's going to be S plus S speed. So I'm just going to go to the right, do that, hit delete to get rid of the L. And then this is where sometimes it gets tiny bit funky, because sometimes you might have a base move. If it was S plus S plus S, this gets in the way. So then you might want to resize this so it's not in the way and you can actually fit all the letters. The other thing you can do here with this one is you could shrink the cannon box to the right and then expand the movement box. But anyway, here it's not too bad. I'm just going to move this like a tiny bit to the left, just so it fits in a little bit better, and that second S isn't too far towards the edge. The ship does have a link. I am going to do a linked crew with this one. And if you go into the layers panel under any of the templates, you should have the option based on your card background color to go black or white with the link symbol. So right now it had the white link symbol hidden. That's what that closed eye means. It's a hidden object. So if we unhide that, it's still not, we still don't see it because black link symbol is right over the top of it. They're in the exact same spot. But then if we hide black link symbol, it'll turn white because that one is now on. And then of course, if you don't have a link on the ship, you can actually just turn off the group. You can just hide the group like that. And then regardless of what's visible inside the group, it'll stay hidden because the group selects both essentially. So, all right. And then the next thing, if we're going top to bottom, left to right on the deck plate, would be the cannons. This is where it gets a little bit funky. There's a few different ways to do this. I have a cannons folder, the icon, and then I have a separate cannons folder inside that actually controls the different cannon like D6 marks. So there's one on the deck plate for, the stat card part, and then there's these on either side of the mast. And then the cannons box, usually sometimes I lock that one so it doesn't move around too much. It's really easy to lock and unlock objects by going over to the right in the layers panel, and you can click that lock button. And then, for example, if I do that on the group for cannons, it'll lock everything inside too. So now when I click, notice it didn't select that. It select what's underneath it, which is the card background. So locking and unlocking objects can be a pretty key part of editing. So if you click the cannon icon and you're like, why is it not selecting that? And then you try to move it and it's moving the card background. It could be because the cannons, that part is locked. So now if we go in here, usually when you click a group, or if you click anything that's part of a group, it'll select the topmost selection, like the group itself. So see, cannons is selected. So then if you wanted to move the icon, you end up moving all three. So usually I just double click to get inside the group, and now I can move the cannon icon around, for example. But then if you click away and you click back, sometimes it'll go back to the group. So just something to get used to. And I think you can actually, if you hold control, if you have nothing selected and you hold control, what you select will actually go straight all the way down to that part. So in this case, it didn't even select that 3S cannon. It went to that middle pip on the cannon. So it goes in. So if you hold control, you can get within groups. You can select within them more easily. So now I'm going to move this panel a little bit to the right so it's kind of minimized horizontally so I can see my field of view a little more easily. So now we've got these cannons. So really, I've got a 4S cannon on this ship. So I don't want the ones here. So I'm going to go in. This is something I'm going to add to the symbols database. I don't have this in a symbols folder yet, but it's something I plan to work on. Basically, I have SVGs and PNGs of all the different cannon ranks. So I'm just going to drag from my computer. And then under SVG import type, I'm going to say include SVG image as editable objects in the current file. That's usually the one I use for importing SVGs. And now we see 4S cannon, and it automatically gets moved to the top of the stats layer. You can do some things to control that. I think in preferences, you can have things go automatically to the bottom of whatever layer or folder you're inside of, but usually I just leave it as the top. So, and then sometimes I have a glitch where the snapping doesn't work. I guess it's working now, but sometimes zooming in will help you snap things better. So I want this cannon to be right over the top of the 3S. So you can see right there, it's right over it, bounding box midpoint to midpoint. And then I need 2 more of these though, because I need one on each side of the mast. So I'm gonna with this selected over in the right, 4S, I held down control and then I hit D to duplicate, and then I'm gonna do it again. So now I have 2 more 4S cannons, and I'm gonna go ahead and drag those and center those over the existing 3S Canon D6 markings that are on the mast for this ship, because this one has 4S cannons, the ship I'm making. And so now that that's done, I'm going to go over the right in the layers panel. I'm going to have the 4S. I'm going to select all three of them. A lot of times when you have an object selected and then you click below it, while holding shift, it'll select everything in between. Once in a while that doesn't work, but you can get around it by holding control and then just selecting the ones that you want. So there's different, whether you're holding shift or control, there's different ways to select multiple things in the layers panel. So I've got those cannons selected now, and we want them down here. So I'm just going to drag them underneath cannons. And then sometimes, depending on the way the green part looks, like I had them like that, I think, and then they put it in the same folder but underneath. So if you have over on the right, you can see when I make little tiny adjustments to my mouse, it's either that little curve on the left is pointing up or down. So here we want it to point down to be within that Canon's subfolder. So, and now I already know that all the 3S cannons are irrelevant now. You could hide those if you wanted to like swap between, or if you hadn't decided yet like what cannons you wanted the ship to have. But since I know this is going to be 4S, I'm just going to delete those 3S cannons. And it might be a little bit weird that the cannons are basically SVG files with all the pips like individual dots and stuff, but you could also work with PNGs, like transparent PNG files of the D6 markings. So, all right. So I might save the flag for a little bit later because those are usually the trickiest ones. But anyway, so I'll just finish some of this stuff first. So under abilities, I'm going to bring up what it's got in my Chrome tab. So the ability text box is just like editing any other text box. One thing I've noticed that's a little annoying, I don't know how to get around this. If you select all and then do Control V to paste, it usually changes the font, and sometimes it changes the color as well. So to get around that, usually I select all but like the first letter or two letters, and then I'll paste it like that. And then I just go back and delete the first letter. That usually like pastes it as plain text is essentially what it's doing. If you do Control Shift V, like you're pasting as plain text in like a Google Doc, it doesn't work, at least not for me right now. So anyway, so I usually just delete all but like the first letter of a text box, and then you can just do Control V to paste it, and then I just delete that letter. And then to adjust where this shows up, there's this diamond icon over on the right. So if you move that around, that's how you can adjust where this text shows up. So I'm going to have to shrink this text quite a lot to make it fit within this box. The ship type is a little bit different because there's a lot of stuff on the front of the card, so that the ability box doesn't have room to extend all the way to the right horizontally. So I'm going to select all with Control A. And then up here, now that we're inside this text box, you may have noticed this top toolbar has changed. So here we've got our font controls, style, and then size. So I'm going to go down to 6. I should be able to make it a little bit bigger. I'll try 7 for now. And then we can actually go to like 7.3 or what we can go out to decimals as much as we want to. And there's all kinds of different font choices and whatnot. One that I might mess with a little bit is the spacing between baselines. So it's a little confusing because before I changed that, let me just undo for a minute. Before I changed that, it says 0, but then if you hit a plus, it actually goes smaller. So it's kind of weird. The default is technically way above 0. It just doesn't reflect that when there's no change made to it. So this is basically so I can have less vertical spacing between my lines. It'll make it a little bit easier to get this text inside the box the way I want it to. So that looks a lot better. It's not quite right. So really, I want this text to be as big as possible, right? Because you don't want people to struggle to read your ability text. So I'm going to go ahead and make it 8. Actually, maybe bigger. I think it didn't register 8. Okay. Yeah. So something like that might work it's going to be really tight. So we can drag this out, but then it's going to go over the side. So we'll probably have to go a little smaller. So I'll try 7.5, go from there. Really, I want that turn letter, that word, to be right here so that it doesn't have to extend to a fifth line vertically. And there might be ways to adjust that I'm not aware of. So feel free to comment if you know Inkscape well and have better experience editing the text. So, but I'm just going to play around with it for a minute. 7.4. Try 7. Let me try it like 7.2, and then I'm going to adjust the diamond over here. Yeah, that looks okay. Actually, I'm going to try it back to 7.5 and see if I can get it. And then you could also, the other thing you can do is change the size of the ability text box. You can expand that, but in this case, it's almost already maxed out, so it's not gonna help that much. So I think that's probably as good as I'm gonna get it for this one, for how long the ability text is. So got that there. One thing, another little weird glitch I found annoying. I haven't found a solution for this online yet. You'll notice that the E is cut off, and then the R at the bottom is cut off. So it's kind of weird. Sometimes when you zoom out, some of them will get better, sometimes they don't. One way to get around that is to go to path, object to path. And then if you click that, now, you notice on the right here, if I undo, it was a text box, like a text object. You can go to the object properties and see auto wrap text. Now, if I go back to path, object to path, it turns it into a path. So, which basically means that it's made up of nodes now instead of text. So if I just hit N, which is the shortcut for the node tool, edit paths by nodes, if I hit N, look at that. So now we have a ton of nodes. I'll get into node editing later with some of the actual artwork, but now it converted the text into nodes, which is something I almost never do. And the only reason I usually do it is to get around this weird issue where it clips off some of the bottom and tops of letters. For now, I actually don't want to do that. I'm just going to leave it as ability text. Usually I only convert it to a path right at the end when I'm trying to export the cards. So, because eventually we're gonna export, like, card 1 front is going to be all this stuff, and we're going to use the cut outline of the card to chop out those rounded edges. But that's not for a while. That's like at the end. So anyway, so I wouldn't worry too much about if the text doesn't look right. I think the windlass font is especially tricky, or fonts where the letters go a little bit above or below where the line is kind of recognized vertically. So it's kind of weird, but I'm actually gonna change the card background next, because this is not a Spanish main ship. So I'm kind of, now that I've gotten those, like, the basic stat part of the top front card done, it's kind of putting me off that it's got the Spanish main background. It looks kind of funky. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete those. And so now we just have a white background. And this is where you would put in your card background for your specific custom set or whatever. Arshellen has links to download all the original set card backgrounds and whatnot. But this one is for Pirates of the Epic Seas. So I'm going to go ahead in my computer and go find the 3.5 by 2.5 uncropped background. So I'm going to drag that in here. I'm going to image import link. And then, so there we have our nice Epic Seas card background. And with snapping still enabled, what's really nice is this should basically, it's going to snap right into place. Sometimes you have to zoom in or out. Yeah, it's kind of sometimes it's a little annoying. The snapping kind of gets crazy because it tries to snap to, like, anything it finds. So, all right. And then I'm just going to copy paste. You could duplicate as well, but the difference between copy and paste and duplicate is interesting. I'm sure there's more differences than I can even mention here, or that I'm aware of. When you duplicate, the nice thing about duplicating is it stays in the same spot. So I'm going to duplicate this card background, and you can see at the bottom right, it added a new one, and then I can drag that wherever I want. So if you want things to stay in the same spot, duplication is best. I like to copy and paste sometimes. because then it offsets it, which sometimes makes it easier to grab, especially if it's like a small object and you don't need them right on top of each other. But like for the link symbol, for that, for example, I probably duplicated it. So that way I wouldn't have to like line them up again after. So, all right. So next, I think I'll do the set icon next. So the rarity corner is its own little spot. So it's got a lot of different elements. There's this black line that separates it from like the rest of the card. There's the collector's number, of course. There's the set icon, and then there's the rarity color in the corner. It's like the background of that whole thing. So I recreated all these from the original cards and whatnot. I did like color matching and the eyedropper, color picker and whatnot. So this is actually going to be a limited edition. So what's nice about these is that all the rarities are represented and they're all hidden except for the one that you want. So the default, I just had rare enabled, and you could also unhide a bunch of them and then be like, okay, I want it to be uncommon and then just hide rare or whatever. But usually I just have whatever rarity I want showing. So this one's going to be a limited edition. And so I'm just going to unhide that so then it shows up. And set icon is just a placeholder. And I'm going to go drag in my set icon for Pirates of the Epic Seas. So in this case, probably the white icon. Let's see here. I'm going to link this one when I drag it in, and then I'm going to flip it around a bit. Yeah, there we go. Okay. So that's okay. So that was pretty easy. That's a whole nother video about like set icons and making them to card size, making a black and white version so that they work on rarity corners. Like if this was a generic card, then I would need like a black link symbol. So, but that's a whole nother topic. So, all right. And then we've got the collector's number, which is one of the more interesting parts of this whole process. All right. Next, we're going to look at the collector's number and how it's linked to all other collector's numbers in the file. So I'm really happy I set this up properly. I think at least some of the templates don't have this yet, where they're linked to each other essentially. And they're basically clones. So how you do this, I'm going to leave for the third video because that gets into more of like how to make an artwork template from scratch. But it's essentially just making a text box like this with a number, and then you go to edit, clone, and then you create clones, and then they're linked to the original of the selected object. So that means when you edit one of them, they all change the same. So this one is based on the rarity corner collector's number. So if you go in the right under the layers panel, you see how this is got a T, I think is for text. Yeah, exactly. So under object attributes, that's basically a text box. So if that's already selected over here in the window and I hit T, it goes into editing the text. So I can change the number. And then the key though, so you don't have to manually change them all, underneath here, towards the bottom of the stats panel, or layer, I should say, stats layer, I have collector's numbers in a folder, and you can see they say use, and then a number, and those are the clones. So those are not, you can edit those individually if you want to, but those are all based on the bottom left, the one that's actually in the rarity corner. And then if we go up here, we can see it's a clone. It's not its own, it's not really an individual text box. So in this way, if we select collector's number rarity corner, and then I'm going to type an A just to show how it changes basically. So if I type A after the number, you can see all these other collector's numbers, all the clones, they're all linked. So they all got an A after them. And I already have this all set up so that these are properly rotated and everything, so that when you punch the ship out, for example, that number is going to be right side up if you look at the hull the other way, kind of like the mirror image of this one on the starboard hull basically. So that's all already set up, and it's also, most of them are also in the same locations you would find on a regular ship or like an original ship. So, and I actually left a little bit of space to the left of them for the set icon. But that's up to you if you want to put set icons on the bottom of your artwork, you know, where there's not going to be anything. It's just kind of up to you. It depends on how you're making the ship. If you're doing decals, I never do decals for like the undersides of the deck or whatever, because there's no real point, and it would just add thickness that might interfere with how the slots and the tabs play together. But if you're doing laser cut where you have artwork on both sides of the card, you could do that and include the set icon. But anyway, so this one is actually, since it's a limited edition in my gigantic Epic Seas custom set, it's actually a 4-digit number. So it's really crazy. Right now, the number on this one is subject to change just because I'm going to keep expanding Pirates of the Epic Seas, but it is technically number 1087 in the set right now. So, and the nice thing is now, if I move this over here, the other ones don't move unless they're also selected. But if I rotate, then they do rotate 90 degrees. So that's just something to keep in mind with the clones and how they're linked to the original. But basically, I'm going to just set this up here. This is probably a time when I'm going to turn off snapping, because like you can see here with snapping enabled, it's trying to snap it to like part of the deck outline or the deck artwork, or it's trying to snap it to the side of the card outline, which I don't really want either of those. So I'm going to turn off snapping, that top right button. The shortcut is a %sign. I usually don't use the shortcut on that, but whatever. So, and then I'm going to get this kind of right where I want it. You could center it in various ways on the rarity corner, but a lot of times, sometimes it's just easier to eyeball it. It takes less time. So I'm just going to leave it like that. And then now I can go in and edit these clones individually. And you can see this 7 is going to be cut off by part of the outline. So, and this is also set up to have no decal outlines where there's no decals. So you'll notice there's a decal line where that white line is on the mast, because you need both sides of the mast for decals. But since I don't make decals for the bottom of the deck because there's no point. So then there's no outline. So that's why you might notice some differences between some of the shapes. And in this case, I think I can just move all of them to the left a little bit. Yeah, when I do that, not only does it show up now, so it won't get cut out. It shouldn't, as long as the cut is aligned properly, that 7 shouldn't be cut. And not only that, but I think that also centered the number on the masts better. So I think that was an easy swap. And that takes care of the collector's numbers. And I'm actually going to change this to white font, the 1 out of 1. That's a big one with card backgrounds, is the font color. And that's actually something I might change around on this ship and this set. Is with the Epic Seas card background, it's a little bit, I really like how it looks, but it's a little suboptimal because it's kind of all over the place in terms of lightness and darkness. So the bottom is more dark, the top is more light, but then there's this like dark purple cloud area. So it might look better if the ability text is white, but then it's a little weird because then I don't know if I want the ability text to be a different color than the ship name color. So that's something I'm going to play around with. One thing you can do with that is you can change the opacity. So I might go 60% opacity on card, and now I can make this black and it's going to show up better. But I'm not going to do that quite yet just because I don't really know how it's going to turn out. One thing I've noticed is my color printer prints ink. It kind of prints a little lighter than I expect it to, compared to like how the artwork and the colors show up on the laptop screen. So something to keep in mind, and that could also vary based on your production method and what kind of printer you're using, whether it's like a inkjet printer for decals or a UV printer for printing on styrene, or something else entirely like a solvent printer. So there's gonna be differences in how the colors and shades turn out. So that's something I'm gonna have to keep experimenting with and playing around with. So okay, so for the next part, I'm gonna edit a couple text boxes here. So this is gonna have a link to a cursed crew. I'm just gonna undo so I can, and sometimes when you type, after you select all and then start typing, it'll change the font. So I just kind of go like that, hit home, hit delete for the first letter. And then, so this one has a linked crew called Cursive Almond. And I'm going to select both here. And then, as you can see over on the right in the stats column, you can see that they're both selected, black link symbol. And actually, I'm going to select the folder in general, along with the linked game pieces text box. And now I can click behind them as long as it's not locked, the card background, which is not locked right now. So I'm going to hold shift, click behind it, and now it's selected the card background for card 1 back. And now I can go to align and distribute. It's going to be relative to the last selected, and I want to center it. So I'm going to center it on the vertical axis, and there we go. So of course now the link symbol is a little off. So usually I just center the text and then just kind of adjust this as needed. So, and then for the flavor text, I've got that in my spreadsheet that I'll just copy paste. And this is basically a one master I'm making for a cursed mega pack from Pirates of the Epic Seas. And it's intended to be initially released for the Halloween season 2024 for a little thematic, scary, cursed release. So the flavor text is, to earn the ire of the mummy is to gaze directly on one's mortality. So we've got a pretty scary custom idea here. And so this one, we'll see if I do one line. Sometimes I might kind of I think that might look better. And that way, if there's any issues with the bleed or the ink or the cut, the card cut, then it's less likely to cause issues. So, and once again, I can select the text, and then you can do shift click for the card background and then center on vertical axis to last selected. And for example, if I had first selected, it would, well, in this case, they're both centered. But if I have first selected, then it can base it on the text because I selected that one first. So that takes care of the back of the card. And now we can actually get full on into the artwork. So, and see a few things that I'll probably fix on the artwork template at some point. If you see, it's kind of hard to see, but if you check out on the right on ability box in the panel here, you can see there's like a scissors icon. It generally means there's like a mask or clip on that object. In this case, we don't need it. I think this is partly because I copied these from old files. There's a lot of copy pasting in some of the objects throughout the artwork templates. So these ones don't need clips. So you can just release clip, and then for the extra path, which is just like a card size rectangle, you can just delete that. And then point compass box is unedited. Now it's just a regular box. There's no unnecessary clip on it. So, all right. So now we'll get into the shape outlines. So these might have a little bit of a different name depending on the artwork template you use. I think I'm going to name this shape outlines background bleed, because I think that's a little bit more descriptive, because we've got the cut outlines, and then I'll show in the video where I do how to make an artwork template. I'll show how I make the full shape outlines. It's basically just taking the shape outlines cut layer, duplicating it, and then you use a path offset to basically make these like bleed background areas. Because you can see how, just like on the original cards for a regular ship, you need like artwork bleed around the cut area. So the cut, if it's off by 0.5 millimeter, or sometimes even more than that, but if it's off by a little bit, you'll still be within the artwork. So then hopefully you don't end up, even with a miscut, hopefully you don't end up cutting out part of the card background, for example. So, all right. So now minimize the stats layer. Sometimes I lock the cut outlines and the stats layers just to not edit those, because those are usually the first things I edit and make sure they're correct. And then a lot of times after that, I don't really need them too much. So we're going to go into shape outlines, background shapes. I'm going to ungroup this one. I'll probably change that in the template too, if I remember. But I'm going to go top down, I think. So we're going to start with main deck top. So this one right now, I'm going to describe kind of what's happening. So you can see that there's a gradient. So we have main deck top. That's the only thing selected. At the bottom left, you can see the fill is a radial gradient. And I can edit that by going to the fill and stroke panel. So if you go to object, fill and stroke, or use Control Shift F, that will bring up this panel. I usually just have it. It's one of my most used panels, so I always have it on the right. It's always in my tabs over here. So now we can go to fill. So we can go to stroke. You can see there's no stroke. At the bottom left, it says none. So if you go to stroke paint, it'll say no paint. And then since there's no stroke, the stroke style is not relevant. The main thing we're concerned with here is fill. So we've got our gradient, and you can see by the slight blue highlight around this rectangle, we have a radial gradient selected. If we select linear gradient, it'll keep the colors, but it'll change it to a line gradient. And you can see how that affected the deck quite a bunch there. So, and this is where things get really fun and interesting. So one thing you can do is you can just do a basic fill. I could just do that like dark brown color. I can make the fill color whatever I want. I could do like a crazy blue or red. A lot of times for the artwork templates, I just start with a basic brown or sometimes a brown gradient. So, and then you can undo all this with Control Z. So that's Control Z is of course very useful as it is with a lot of programs. So you've also got kind of like a default gradient library. I've seen this kind of vary with the files I use. I feel like it's not super consistent. I don't know if it's a slight Inkscape glitch, but there are a lot of different gradients that are already set up, which can be nice. So you could do like an orange starburst color. You could do more yellow. Maybe it looks kind of more like a Spanish ship. There's a lot of cool things you can do with the gradients. I do like to start with kind of a more natural wood color. And you also notice there's this wood pattern here. So for this template, that's based on wood, the wood layer, which is separate from the shape outlines. So this is specifically a pattern. It's not a regular fill, like a color. If I switch to a flat color, it just covers up what's underneath it because the wood layer is above the shape outlines layer. So if I make it a solid color, it'll cover up the one below it. And then if I hide the wood layer, you'll see the gradient shine through. So I'm going to undo both of those changes and go back to this pattern fill. So if you wanted something on top of the shape background, this is why it's good to have multiple layers for this, because it gets a little too complicated and kind of difficult from what I've seen, because this is basically a wood texture over the top, but it's transparent. So if I change the color here to like a green, that'll change the green of the wood grain, but then you can see the gradient underneath is still there. So the wood is only like a pattern that's kind of lying on top of the other stuff. And then I could change the pattern. One thing about patterns that's good to know is that you're probably going to want to adjust the scale quite a lot. And these cards are sized to actual size. So they're not, the design is not very big. If you go up here and change our dimensions to inches, you can see it's 3.5 by 2.5. So it's actual size. So therefore, when you go to edit a pattern, it's essentially like zoomed way in a way. So you'll probably want to adjust the scale pretty aggressively so that you can actually see the pattern. Like if I switch to flowers, it defaults to like, that's almost like a wide view. So if I expand, well, that won't work, but basically you have to decrease the scale and then you'll start to see the pattern design show up. Usually you have to go like way down, almost to a minimum. So, and now I can have like this leaf pattern or whatever. So, and you can adjust the scale in different ways. You can adjust offset. I usually only adjust scale. I don't think adjusting offset doesn't matter too much. Orientation you might want to play with, but more for like a wood pattern. So I'm just going to undo a ton. So we get back to our wood. So if I adjust orientation, then I can make the wood go like diagonal. So if I didn't want it to be like bow to stern, I can change that orientation there. But I'm just gonna go back to 90 degrees basically. So it's bow to stern. So the wood grain is running along the deck. And so this one, I'm gonna change it. This is a nice, it's nice that they have this wood texture. There's a lot of other ways to do that. There's grids, and you could do like a striped grid. I think under all patterns, you can see the various things you can select, and they all have different names. There's also settings where you can show the names or not. And then the tile size, if it's too small for you, you can increase the tile size quite a bunch to get a little bit better look at the preview. I think the default is kind of fine. Smaller, you can still see it like reasonably well, or just good enough anyway. So there's a lot of interesting patterns. A lot of these are a little bit too like perfect shapes to work well with a ship, because realistically the shapes wouldn't be that many right angles, and you wouldn't, a lot of these patterns just don't make sense for like a ship. But some of them might look better on sails than on the wood of like a deck or a hull. But either way, I'm not going to use the wood pattern on this one, partly because I'm going to totally change the artwork. So mastaba, the name of the ship, it comes from a type of ancient Egyptian tomb in the form of a flat-roofed rectangular structure constructed out of mud bricks or limestone. So marked burial sites of many eminent Egyptians during Egypt's early dynastic period and Old Kingdom. So that's kind of where the ship name comes from, and it kind of ties in with the ancient Egyptian, like almost like an evil, undead, cursed mummy theme. So I'm going to look around for a pattern that might work for that. And there is a search function. So I'm going to search stone. Nothing comes up for that, or rock. But I think there is a brick one. So I might try that. So I can try out the brick pattern. I don't know if I'm going to go with this one or not, but I'm going to edit the pattern first, and then I'm going to edit the colors afterwards. So something like that, it's kind of weird. It might not make a lot of sense for the artwork. I don't really know what I'm going to do with this. It's going to be pretty interesting, I think. But I think I'm going to go with kind of like a yellowish tan. I'm going to kind of base it on like pictures I'm seeing online with like, yeah, kind of like a light brown, yellowish tan brick type color. So we've got our brick pattern here. The scale is already pretty much minimized. If I adjust the actual number, it doesn't even go any lower than that. So 0.01 is the lowest you can go on the scale, it looks like. But that's fine. I think that's just enough. I think that's just small enough in terms of the brick pattern to make a little bit of sense. So, and also whenever you edit colors, there's usually a wide variety of color wheel type options. There's RGB, which I use a lot. I do like the HSL color wheel. I haven't really used the other ones too much. They do have a CMYK as well. I do like the HSL wheel personally. So I'm going to mess around with this. So if I want to go with some kind of lightish brown, I might start with something similar to that. I might go a little bit more yellow. But you can see how easy it is to change the color and the saturation and things like that. Probably something like that, a little more orange maybe. Let's see. That's a little too orange there, I think. Yeah, something like that. Give it a little bit of a desert feel. So I might start with that. And then what's crazy, there's a lot of additional things you can do. So there's these things called blend, which I haven't really played around with too much, but you can see how much this is changing the appearance pretty dramatically, which I think I might actually mess around with a bit. So there's a ton of different options, and I think I'm just gonna look around for one I like. I think soft light, that might look pretty good, keeping in mind that I'm gonna change the background gradient colors and whatnot. So hard light's kind of interesting. difference. That's almost like the opposite color. A lot of these just change the color dramatically, and it's not the effect I'm going for, but there are some interesting ones as well, as you can see from me clicking through this. I think I'll try soft lay for now. And then if we go back under shape outlines to main deck top, now I'm going to go ahead and change that actual gradient. So I think I want to have some lighter colors in here. So I'm going to change what's behind those bricks now. So I definitely don't want that light. I'm thinking like almost like a dark orange brown type color. Yeah, something like that maybe. It might look kind of weird for a ship, but this is just something I'm just doing up basically from scratch. So it's always interesting to create ship artwork. I think something, yeah, that looks kind of intriguing actually. Let's undo that real quick. So that's going to be the color underneath the bricks, like running in between them. But I think I'm going to change this quite a bunch more too. Yeah, so we can make this one more orange or more gray. We could totally change the color of it. I think I'm going to change that color a bit. I think I want to move the orange out. So these are all the gradient sliders. So you can change where they go. You can see if I bring it in here, it'll create, when you have them touching, it'll create like a hard line with no blur in between the colors. Or if I go all the way to the outside, you can barely, it's a very gradual change. So I'm going to keep it pretty far to the outside. Usually I don't like to have like the colors overlapping where you can see a hard line. It kind of defeats the purpose of a gradient almost. It can be good to create certain effects, but usually I don't bother with it too much. And then if you want to edit the actual points of the gradient, I think there's a couple of different ways to do this, but one way is you can click the gradient tool, and then now we actually see exactly where all these things come from on the gradient. So we can see the origin point, and if I move that around, it'll move the center of that radial gradient. And then I can also directly edit the angle of it. I can edit that last point. I can edit all the different sliders. I can play with them in real time here. So there's different locations where you can edit the sliders and how they affect the gradient. So I think I am going to keep it. I think I am going to keep it center. Maybe I'll go a little bit different just to change this up a little bit. I'm just going to go like a tiny bit just to change it up a little bit. I'm going to move it a little bit to the left just to kind of mess with it slightly. And then for the middle color, I want it darker. So I'm going to go ahead and change that color quite a bit and make it dark in the middle, a little bit lighter on the outside. And I think I want to change this color a little bit too, make it a little bit more orangey. Not too much though, a little more saturation. Okay. I think that looks okay. And a lot of times, sometimes you keep editing ship artwork for long periods of time and it doesn't come out the way you want. But it can be pretty tricky to get it right and get the effect you want. So this one is almost designed to look like the top of a brick, like mastaba, basically. So, and of course I'll change all this other stuff too, so the color palette makes a little bit more sense. One word of caution I would say on editing ship artwork, especially on a bigger screen, like a full computer or laptop screen, is that the details never come out as well as you'd like them to, partly because the card size is actually pretty small. And of course, every individual ship part is always smaller than the cards themselves. So it's good to sometimes maintain perspective by zooming out and kind of looking. You can even hold up a physical card to your screen and be like, okay, if this is real life, this is how small these details are going to look. So based on that, do I really want to spend time editing this individual cannon and like changing the colors of the wheels on the cannon? Like a lot of times the editing the details kind of gets almost a little bit pointless just because it doesn't always come out, especially based on your print quality. Sometimes, so far I haven't seen my printer is not able to reproduce the exact quality of the original cards too. So I would just, a word of caution on it's easy to get a little bit wound up about editing every little detail and trying to make the ship artwork perfect. and then in the end it kind of comes out and it almost feels like a wash. So if you want to emphasize something, definitely make it like big and bold. So whether that's like a color or like a feature, like a cannon, because once this is printed, these cannons might be so small that they almost just look like little tiny black lines on the side. So you could make them bigger if you wanted to. So I might just use different cannons for this one. I don't know yet. So of course, these are just images. In the artwork assets database I eventually plan to share, I might have SVG versions where you can actually go in and edit the gradient, so you can edit that like purple color and the brown and all that. But it's easiest to just use linked images. So all right, so I'm gonna start on the hull artwork. I don't know if I'm totally satisfied with the deck, but it's a decent start. I think real quick I'm gonna actually edit something real quick. I think that brown is not the way I want. So I'm gonna go back down to main deck top, go to the editing, the gradient, and I think this orange brown back and forth looks a little bit funky for me. So I think I'm gonna lighten these up a bit. When I zoomed out, it didn't look quite right to me. So I think I like that a little better. Yeah, there's a little too much orange going on, not enough like tan yellowish. Yeah, it was a little too orange for desert stones, I would say. Even this, we can make this a little bit more brown, a little less red. Adjust the lightness a little bit. So, all right. So we're gonna keep moving here, get into the hull artwork. So under deck and hull art, I have the stuff that's on top. It's arranged in a way so that everything is top to bottom. Because if you have this layer underneath wood, then the wood will show up. I'll kind of give a quick example. If you drag wood up here, then it'll cross out the ship name. So it's all arranged in a certain way on purpose. So you can of course play with the template and make it however you want. You might want to delete the entire deck and hull art layer depending on how simple you want your design to be. But the way I edit hull artwork is usually I edit one to completion and then I duplicate it and drag it and like mirror it or rotate and then for the other one. So that way you don't have to edit the same thing twice. Sometimes I do that a little bit with the gradients because eventually you can actually edit a gradient and give it a name and then basically reuse that gradient over and over again. But sometimes depending on the shape of the objects you're selecting, sometimes the gradient will show up differently because it's, a circle will look different in a hull piece than a deck piece. So, all right, so starboard hull wood, if we look over here, you can see the scissor icon there. So that means there's some kind of clip or masking. So I'm gonna go ahead and release clip just to kind of check out what's going on there. So basically I have a wood, it's basically a clipping mask, which is wood from another like ship type, like a 4 or 5 master, I think, that I clipped to this shape. So clipping and masking, I highly recommend watching like an individual tutorial on it. I'm sure there's others that can explain this stuff better than I can. Like I said, I've got some channels linked in the description if you want to check it out. But clipping and masking, it's a little funky to understand at first if you've never worked with it. It works pretty similarly in Adobe Illustrator as well if you've used that. Basically, you want to have the path that you want to have the bottom part inside of. The path is going to be on top. So here we have starboard hull outside, and you can see it's a path. And then we have an image of starboard hull wood. So that's an image that I have linked from another ship on my computer. It's its own file that I exported as a transparent PNG. Now, if we select both, we can go to Object, Clip, Set Clip. And now it's contained to the shape of that path, and it basically combines the two. So now we have like this nice wood grain pattern on the hull. So that's basically how I made that. So I think I'm actually going to leave that mostly the same. The only thing I might change, I think it'd be hard to change the color of the wood because it's already an image. So unlike that pattern wood that we we edited earlier, this one is it's just an image. So there's no real fill. Changing the fill is not going to change it because it's a picture, not like an editable object. But if we had the original SVG or whatever, we can go in and edit the color. I think I might just leave it the same for now. And that's partly why I like to make the templates with a little bit of detail, just so there's kind of like a really basic, believable, like historical ship structure of some kind to the artwork. So that way it's a little bit easier to make stuff. Because if it was just this gradient here without the wood, it looks a little boring, and it doesn't look quite as realistic, I would say. So that's why there's sometimes wood included with the artwork templates. I think for this one, I might keep it actually. I don't think I want the whole ship to look like this brick pattern. I think I'm going to keep that on the deck for this one. I think I'm going to keep wood on the hull. So now we're going to go down to starboard hull outside. And that one's named because obviously it's the starboard hull, because it's got to be on the right, because that has the artwork on the right side of the ship. And then it's the outside because it's showing, and then the inside would be the other side there. So, and we're going to edit this gradient. Basically, I'm going to make it more yellow. So we're going to go back over to the fill and stroke panel. We go to fill, and we can see that there is a gradient. You can adjust this a little bit in the bottom left, linear gradient fill. You can do a bunch of different things here. I don't usually do this too much. Usually I only do this to like unset fill or like remove stroke, things like that. Usually when I edit the gradients, it's mostly in this panel over here. So like I said, I think I want to make this more yellow. I think I want to make it, I like that right there actually too. And make it look a little bit more like a desert look instead of just the basic wood look. So now we've got like greenish yellow there. I don't want green, so I'm going to go something like this. And then, okay, so I'm glad this actually is getting messed up because it allows me to talk about the opacity. So you can probably see a little bit that there is, there's like an opacity to this circle, which I don't really want. So if you want to adjust that, so see, for example, I can adjust the opacity independent of the color. So it's both. This gradient stop has yellow, but with a transparency effect. So if I make it totally transparent, you can see the card background behind, which is generally the opposite of what you'll mostly want. So you can adjust this and just go to 100% opacity, and now it's just the solid yellow, and there's no transparency. So that's what I want in this case. And I think I might make it just a tiny bit darker. I don't want like a bright yellow. So yeah, something like that. What you can do, you can adjust the opacity of the image. I might do that. So if we go to the starboard hull wood, there's also an opacity slider down here that I can adjust with my scroll wheel on my mouse, or I can highlight it. Usually I highlight it and I just type in a number. So I think I might have some opacity to this wood, because I think it's going to make the ship name a little bit harder to read, kind of in a way that I don't really like. So I think I'm going to make the wood effect a little less obvious, a little less like dominant. I might go to like 60 or 70% opacity there. So yeah, I think something like that might look better for the wood. And then, okay. So now if I go back down, starboard hull outside, I'm going to go back to editing the gradient, and I'm going to kind of try to maintain that desert feel with like a brown towards the bottom. I definitely don't want it too bright, but it's going to be lighter. I think it'll be a little bit lighter color than the last part. I think this yellow looks a little too, it's like swampy or something. It's kind of weird. I'm going to go a little bit more like a dandelion. I don't really want any green in it, so I think something like that looks decent. And then for this last part, I got to go a little more. Yeah, I think I need a little more orange here too. Yeah, a little bit of a, mostly brown, but a little bit orange towards the bottom. And this doesn't have to be the final design by any means. I think I'm gonna darken all three of these actually, because in my experience so far, my color printer has printed things lighter than than they appear in the actual artwork. So I'm actually going to darken this on purpose so it's a little bit darker. I think the only other thing, I might make this a little bit less saturated. I think I'm gonna, it's a little too yellow for the desert. I'm gonna do a little bit more grayed out, worn out look. Okay, this is okay. Sometimes ships they don't turn out the way you want. Sometimes I think it looks okay, and sometimes I only have like a vague idea of a ship artwork in my head. Like sometimes it's really clear, like USS America was very easy, I guess you could say, where like it was like red, white, blue, and then the gradient would be the same. And then I found like an eagle SVG to use for the mainsail. So that was super fun. And I knew exactly what I wanted, like from before I even started the file, basically. But other times like this, it's more, I kind of have an idea like, okay, I'll base it on like a physical mastaba and what that looks like, and then just go from there. But sometimes it just turns out a little bit different than what you expected, or it becomes kind of tricky to get the look you want. I think I might actually, I think I like that better actually. I think I'm going to do essentially like a grayish on top and then a muted yellow underneath for the gradient. So I think that's fine. There's also a lot of other gradient options. There's mesh, and well, it's mostly mesh, radial, and linear. So this one is kind of crazy. I haven't done this too much. There's a mesh tool. So this is where this gets kind of wild. I'm not going to really play around with this right now, but I think sometime I'll mess with that, but not with this ship. Some of the features in Inkscape are pretty cool and pretty advanced, but a lot of times you don't really need them to make decent looking ship artwork. So I'm gonna, we have the gradient tool selected here, but I just want to get back to regular select tool. So you can just press S on your keyboard for the keyboard shortcut. And now we're back to having this selected. So starboard hull outside looks pretty good. I kind of like this actually. And of course you can think about like how the ship's going to go together. Maybe these colors will clash a bit. This isn't really even designed to be the best looking ship. So if it looks a little funky or ugly, I'm actually kind of okay with that. It's just kind of supposed to look like a desert creepy ship type thing. So, or at least like a desert mummy experience. So, all right. So starboard hull outside, I'm going to duplicate this and basically move it to do a starboard hull outside. So I've got it selected. It's the only thing selected in the layers panel. I'm going to hold down Control, hit D. And then when it duplicates, it automatically goes to the top of this card one front folder, so that when I drag it, so that goes back to the folder. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to hold Control, and now I can drag it out here and drag it freely. So that's basically our starboard hull outside. To make it the port hull outside, I'm going to go up to the top here and hit Object Flip Vertical. So that basically mirrors it vertically. Now I'm going to go up to the top right, enable snapping, and then I'm going to drag it until it's snapped perfectly over the old port hull outside. And then I'm going to go select port hull outside, delete it. I'm going to move this one down just to preserve the order. I'm going to go in, double click, rename this port hull outside. So now we've got that done. But if you remember, we did adjust the opacity on the wood. So I'm just going to go ahead and check that. So if I click starboard hull wood, and at the bottom left, we can see opacity is at 70%. Port hull wood was never changed. So I'm just going to adjust that down to 70%. And now we basically have our two hull pieces. And one thing I like about these being a tiny bit different is that the wood grain is a little bit different on each one. Like if you can see, there's more vertical lines underneath the ship name on here than on the other one. So it's nice to have. Sometimes you want symmetry, like especially on masts, like front to back, you want the back of the mast to match the front. And same thing with the sails, which I'll talk about probably in a different video. But sometimes on the hull, it makes more sense to not have perfect symmetry, because realistically, like the wood grain wouldn't be the same on both sides. Obviously, that's a detail you don't really need to think about or worry about. But anyway, just something to keep in mind. So All right, so next would be the sails. All right, before I do the sails, I'm just going to take care of the stern flag. It's a cursed ship, not an American ship, so it's kind of bothering me a little bit now. Normally I would do this probably before the hull or deck artwork, but anyway, sometimes I just go like top to bottom, left to right on the cards. So in the video where I talk about how to build an artwork template from scratch, I'll go over how I make this this flag, stern flag with bleed. It's pretty simple. You just take like an enlarged or offset outline, SVG outline of the flag shape, and then you cut it. You put that on top of a card, line it up, and then do object clip, set clip, and then you cut it out, and then you save it individually as a PNG on your computer. But these are assets that I want to include in the database, of course, too. So this is a lot easier than recreating them every time you do a ship, which would be really stupid. So I'm basically gonna drag this in. It might not be exactly the same shape as some other cursed flags, but all right. So we've got our cursed flag with bleed cut out, and I'm just gonna go a little bit lower. So when you have an object selected, you can use the left, right, up, down arrows on your keyboard. One thing that's really useful is holding Alt. If you hold Alt and then do your arrows, it goes like a little tiny bit. So I think of it as like almost like a tick mark. So I can go like one little tick at a time to make really finite movements. And in the grand scheme of how small these cards are in the first place, it's like little teeny tiny movements to get things like lined up really nice. And now to make the other side of it, I'm going to hit Control D to duplicate it. So now there's one right on top of the other one. And now I'm going to flip it. I'm going to flip it horizontally this time. And then I can just do my arrow keys to put it over here. And you can also do, if you do shift in the arrow keys, it's kind of like the opposite of Alt. It does a bigger movement. So I don't use that one too much, but it could be useful. So these ones look pretty good. Sometimes the flags aren't completely aligned on the short edge flip, like vertically, like you'd expect them to be, but these look pretty good. So, and now we can actually delete the other. We actually don't need the flag background. So if we go down to shape outlines, background bleed, under flag starboard, you'll see that one is still there. We still have the black outlines, but we don't really need that. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that one. I definitely like keeping those on the template, especially because it can be helpful if you're creating like a new flag for a new faction. You'll probably want like a reference bleed to kind of see the general size of it. Usually I see background bleed on the original ships at like 1.5 millimeter offset for the background bleed. Usually when I do the path offset under path effects, I do like 1 millimeter, sometimes more. But if you go past 1 millimeter, sometimes the shapes, sometimes they overlap, which isn't a huge problem. But like if I offset this more, these two areas will overlap, which as long as the cut is accurate, that shouldn't matter. But anyway, that's more a topic for the how to make an artwork template from scratch video, which will be the third video in this series and the final like main video of the series. I'll probably make some other artwork tutorial type videos eventually, but we'll see. So now we've got our flags, which is really good. One thing to note before I go on to the sails is that once you get in the swing of this, I would estimate it's about an hour per card for designing ship artwork. At least that's what I've found. Once you get like a general handle on the basics and you get some momentum with it, your first ship will probably take more than that. It might take 2 hours per card, maybe even more, depending on the ship type. A mega cart ship would probably take more time than that. But so for example, if I wanted to do this and I wasn't making a tutorial video on it and I wanted to go as fast as possible, I might be able to get this done in about an hour. Sometimes it can take a little longer because I have to edit on the card one front. I have to edit the stats, and sometimes I play around with like the location of stuff and the text color based on the card background and stuff like that. So for this one, especially with the tutorial video, I had to do some extra stuff. But once you get the hang of it, especially if you don't really need a lot of detail and you're just changing hull and sail colors and gradients. If you're not really doing a lot of like actual graphic design, then it's a lot of times it's pretty quick. So like I said, about an hour per card is what I've seen from when I was designing a lot of the Spanish ships in Pirates of the Golden Seas, for example. So a 3-card ship might be 3 hours of designing artwork and finalizing stuff. That's probably a little bit of a optimistic estimate. You probably want to go a little longer than that by default, but once you get the hang of it, you can whip through it quick if you want to. It just depends on how much detail you want and also how much you're changing from the previous ship. So like for this one, I don't know if I'm going to change the cannons or not. I think I might, but I'm going to do the sails for now. Yeah, I'm going to go to the sails. I might just do the cannons last. Sometimes I just change the order in which I do things. So, all right. So the mast lines I don't want on this ship. I'm actually just going to go ahead and delete them. So the color is actually pretty close to what I want. So if we go to the Masts and Sails, if we go to that layer, the way it's organized is we've got the starboard side, the port side is on the back of the card. If we go under starboard side, there's a rigging part, there's the mast part, and under mast, that's where we have all the different sails. And this is organized so that it actually looks right, where we have the jib sail. I'm going to like change the color so it's easier to see. If we make the jib sail purple, you can see that one's underneath the flying jib. And then if we go over here and we double or triple click to get in here, we can see that the jib sail is on the outside. Because if the wind is blowing here, the wind is blowing to starboard on this ship. Because we've got the starboard side of the mast and sail. The sails are blowing to starboard essentially. And then if we look at the port side, this sail, which would be purple, that one should be on the outside essentially. So just a little note about why it's organized the way it is and why in this subfolder the jib sail is down there, and then in this one it's up higher. So there's just different ways to organize stuff based on how you want it to look. So, and of course you could just have one, you don't have to have a flying jib, you could just do one sail, but this one is the artwork templates. I intentionally make them like pretty close to the original ships, so there's not much lost there. So this is gonna be interesting because I'm gonna make, basically this is based on like a evil mummy concept design. So I basically want to make the sails look like mummy bandages. So there's gonna be, I'm gonna have to create that effect, and it's gonna end up looking almost like a droopy like sail made out of like these bandaged lines. So I haven't done that yet, so it'll be interesting to see what it ends up looking like. All right, so let's see. I'm going to try to create this effect. I don't know how it's going to come out. I'm going to go over here, select the rectangle tool, and then I'm going to drag out like a draft of, it's going to be oversized for now, but I'll shrink it later. But it's going to look like a mummy bandage. So it's just I'm going to try to, I'm actually going to use this same gradient because I think the colors are about right. It's kind of like a light, like an aged canvas look almost. Not too aged, but yeah, kind of like a mummy bandage that's been in a coffin or something. So I drew out the rectangle. Now I'm going to go up to the gradient button, hit linear gradient, and then I actually just renamed this gradient. There's a scroll bar, which is nice because there's a ton of gradients. I renamed the gradient of the sail mummy bandage. so now we're gonna, I don't want it to look like this. I want the dark part on the underside, almost like the almost as if the sun is hitting the top of the bandage sails, and then it's going to be darker towards the bottom. So I'm going to edit it. Something like that looks reasonable to start with. I don't want the dark to be too dominant. So I'm going to make it somewhere in between, something like that probably. And now I don't want this to be a rectangle because I'm not going to be able to work with it because I want to edit the nodes to make it curved, because if it's just horizontal line, it's not going to look right. I want this to look like an aged sail of like drooping bandages. It's going to be weird. So if I hit the node tool here, there are some nodes, but they're not, it's a rectangular shape. And you can see that rectangle 271 over here. And I don't want it to look like that. So the way you change it to a path, you go path and then object to path. And now over on the right, it's got the same name, but you saw the icon change. So instead of a rectangle, now it's got the path icon with those nodes. And now if we hit N for the node tool, or just click it over here, if I hit N as the shortcut, we can now edit the nodes of this rectangle. This is where things get really interesting. There's a lot of node editing involved with creating the actual artwork templates themselves, but you can actually use them pretty effectively to edit the artwork too. So now we can get this curved effect that I'm looking for. There's other ways to do this. You could use the Bezier pen tool and basically make like a curved rectangle from the start, but I kind of wanted to just start with a 90-degree rectangle and then put the gradient in. Now I'm going to add the curves afterwards. So I'm going to basically, I have this node selected. So I have the top right corner node selected. I'm going to hold shift, click within this diamond area, which is a corner node. You can, up here, you can make selected nodes corner. You can play around with those, but I don't really need that too much, I don't think. So I'm going to hold shift, click this diamond, and then I'm going to drag out a handle. So this is a node handle. And then I'm going to do the same thing up here to make this curve. And I don't want too much. So now, and then once you have the handles drawn out and visible, you don't have to hold shift anymore. You can just edit them individually. And now I'm going to do the same thing though, hold shift, and then I'm going to drag these out too. So I'm going to try to make like this drooping effect. So a lot of different ways to do this, like I said, but this is just kind of how I do it. And I'm really used to node editing at this point. I was doing it in GIMP, and then I've had to do it a lot with Inkscape as well. So I'm used to doing quite a lot of node editing. One thing to note, snapping is still enabled. So if I try to drag the handle of this gradient around, it wants to snap to the edge of the rectangle. So I can disable snapping, and now I can have more finite control over how this gradient appears. I think it's probably, having it snapped is actually fine. It's pretty much in the right spot anyway. So I think I'm going to drag this down a little bit. And if you want more control over the gradient, you could add stops. I don't think I'm going to, but you could add stops between each of these colors and make the color change between them even more gradual. Or of course you could change the colors and add some things like that. All right. So now if we select this, now you can kind of see what I'm getting at with how this is going to look. And now if I drag it, I didn't notice there was opacity, which I don't want. So I can go in here and see that this entire thing is 70 opacity. I think because it had saved from an earlier selection in the process. So if I just go to 100, it goes straight to totally solid object. And there is a stroke on this. So this one, it defaulted to having a black stroke. That's from back when I drew the rectangle. I don't think I want that, so I can go ahead and just hit remove stroke, and now you can see there's no black outline. So I don't know. I might have a tiny stroke, but I don't know. That sounds weird. But I might go smaller actually. So I can go up here, stroke style 0.05 mm. I might go like 0.01, just to have like a tiny outline, but not very much. So yeah, I think that's okay. And now it's way too big. I don't want bandages this big. So what I would do is something like this, and then I'd probably rotate it. Okay, one thing I'm going to do right now is lock the card background layer, because I right just then I tried to grab this and I ended up grabbing the card background. So, but if we hold control and click in here, we can just get back to our bandage here. So I'm going to put mummy bandage. It's the name of the object. I find it useful to name objects, so that way you don't have all these random gibberish names. Sometimes you'll see it with the rigging because there's just too many things to name, like the fittings, for example. Like I'm not going to name every single one of these fittings. Like you can see each of these is its own like curved line, basically. Each of those is its own path. I'm not going to name every single one, but you can name like gaff. You still want to have the names of the shapes, and parts of the ship actually make sense, so it's easier to find what you're looking for and stuff like that. So I'm going to go back into this. Yeah, sometimes it's kind of weirdly difficult to select things, but basically I think I want to rotate it. I think I want to make it smaller, but at the same time, I got to realize this is one of those times when I want to zoom out and be like, okay, this is actually going to be a pretty small sail in real life on the ship. So how small can I make it while maintaining the look that I'm after? So, and then what I think I'm going to do is actually duplicate this. I'm going to make an extra one and put it off to the side here. A lot of times when you don't know if a shape you want is like the final version, it's good to have like an alternate off to the side. So that way we have this like default one. If we want to edit this, we have this other one that we still have. And sometimes I'll hide this and then just leave it in the design and not use it again. But for now, I'm going to keep it visible because I think I'm going to use some of those as well. So now it gets interesting because I need a bunch of these, and then I think I'm going to use the sail as a clipping path so that they're clipped. I don't know exactly how I want to do this. I might actually change the sail so there's not a flying jib. Yeah, I think I'm going to do that. I think I'm going to delete jib sail. I'm going to really change this up here. So flying jib sail, I'm going to go in and edit the nodes on this. So we're actually going to, I actually don't think I want a flying, or I don't want two jibs. I just want one basically. So I'm going to drag that out. I'm going to select some nodes there, delete them. This might get a little quicker, and then I'm going to drag this node out here. You can see how you can easily change the shape of a sail. I mean, I can just drag these handles out and make it some crazy shape if I want to. So this is how you can really get creative with your ship, mast, and sail designs without too much trouble. So I'm going to drag it. I think it might be a slightly different shape than we're used to. Trying to make it somewhat unique here. And then, that was weird. All right, I'm going to drag this down so it covers some more of that area there. And then I might adjust this handle here, something like that. And then sometimes I realize that there are nodes that I just don't need. So you can, with the node tool active, you can go ahead and click drag and it'll select any nodes in that area. And then you can hold down Control if you just want to select one at a time, and then you can shift, click, and drag to select multiple, things like that. So good stuff to learn and play around with. I'm just going to try deleting this one because you delete that one and it looks almost the same. It doesn't really, that node wasn't really helping me. So sometimes it's good to minimize nodes because it actually can help keep your file size down. So sometimes if you trace bitmap to trace like an outline, it'll give you like thousands and thousands of nodes. So you can decrease file size. Sometimes I go path, simplify, but sometimes that changes the shape a little too much. So like if I do that here, it's going to delete nodes that I guess that one wasn't too bad. But then if I keep doing it, if I keep simplifying, eventually the shape would get a little bit it would end up not looking the way I wanted it to. So, all right. So I'm just going to drag this up into the corner a little bit more. I might actually just delete the rigging from this ship too. I don't know yet. But either way, I'm going to actually make this a gray color because I'm just going to use this as a clipping path like I talked about. But I'm basically going to have a ton of bandages that make up the sail, and then I'm going to cut them out so it's not in a weird shape. So I'm going to duplicate this like a ton of times. There's various ways you could do this. I think since I want it to look variable, I'm going to do it in a certain way where I have a lot of the same thing. So you can create patterns and repetitions with objects, but I think the reason I don't want to do that for this is I want it to look kind of random, and I don't want it to look symmetrical from top to bottom. So I want the bandages to be different sizes. I want some to be wider than others, some to be longer than others. Even the angle I might change too, like I'm rotating some of them and I might not rotate other ones. So the main thing I want to do here is make sure that when I use the gray as a cut outline, I don't want any of the gray to show. So I want to make sure the bandages are covering up pretty much any and all gray spots. So, and then I think I'm going to go, in the order, I think I'm going to go bottom to top, because if I go top to bottom, the order on the right over here, it's not going to, I don't really want this dark part to show on all of them. I think I'd rather have it look more like that than have the dark part on top, if you will. So, all right. So I think I'm gonna have to duplicate some of these ones down here. Yeah, this is where some of the various tools in Inkscape could probably make this go faster, but I guess I'm not too concerned with that right now. The other thing you can do is change the layer order. So up here with these tools, you can hit lower selection by one step, and you can see on the right, it's going beneath those parts or those objects in the selection. So you could do that too to order these a bit. I think I'm gonna extend some of these out a bit, and then I'll have to rotate them to make sure they cover up that gray area. All right. So I'm going to go through this and get it to look the way I want, and then I'll come back and do the clipping path. All right, so I finally finished with a lot of the bandages. I made some of them more curved. I want it to look kind of disheveled and misshapen and things like that. So kind of messed with some of them a bunch. I grouped them all in a folder. I'm going to move them around a little bit, because the white outline is where the sail would normally be, but then I know the red outline is where the actual cut's going to occur. I think I'm going to move this over a little bit. Probably might even rotate it slightly. Yeah, so it's more in line with the red of the cut outline. And then I'm going to move the flying jib sail, that white part. I'm going to move that probably right about here. And then I'll change that shape a little bit there. Yeah. And now I'm going to I have that selected, and that's important that it's on top, because I'm going to do object clip set clip again. So I'm going to click the folder underneath I'm going to do control, click that, select both. Now object clip set clip, and now it clips it to like the shape of that white outline. So now we kind of have that interesting weird like pattern of like a bandaged sail. So now I would go in, I think I'm going to edit the rigging next. This is definitely one of the more involved designs I've done. Usually it won't be this complicated. It's pretty easy if you just want to change sail colors and gradients, and that's generally best for ships that look somewhat historical. Obviously this is a curse design, and it's like a special release and all that, and I wanted to do something different with it. So I'm going to adjust the rigging there so it kind of looks like it's attached to the bandaged sail. And then we've got this rigging over here that I'm just going to bring up a bit, because the red is going to cut, the cut outline is not going to, most of this this rigging isn't really going to show up anyway. So I think I'm going to delete this one. I don't really need that one. Here there's two of them. I'm going to delete one. I'll keep this one, bring it down a bit. Maybe, yeah, you're not really going to see that anyway. That's one of those details that you're not really going to see very much, if at all. So looks a little bit funky, but it's kind of hard to get it to look the perfect way. What you could also do is have an outline of that jib sail and make that a different color and put it behind. But I think I want to keep the black so it looks like it's there's nothing really behind the bandages, because I want to make it look like there are like gaps between the bandages, like the sails were not set up right, because it's kind of like a misshapen cursed vessel. So that's the jib. And then we can do pretty much the same with this back one. This is actually where I put those more, basically I put the less curved variants in this folder here, because I realized I wanted the droopy ones to be the jib sail. And then for the main sail, we're going to have them be the more straight line ones. So I'm going to go ahead and probably expand these a little bit. Yeah, make them a little bit fatter. And then I'm going to angle them this way. Still a slight droop, but not too much. And then I'm going to use I'm going to use the sail, basically that outline of the main sail. That path is going to be the cut path for this one. All right, so it took me longer than I wanted it to do that, but now we've got main sail, created some different slight shapes. We've got the bandages in a folder underneath. I added this thing towards the stern, an extra bandage basically to kind of hold them together, almost like the edge of the sail instead of a line, pretty much like a rigging line and whatnot. So with main sail as the cut path or the clipping path, I'm going to have that on top with the folder underneath with all those bandages that make up the sail. We're going to go object clip, set clip, and now we've got that set up there. So intentionally there is black on the outside and in between because there are just basically these bandages missing. So that's kind of the effect I want. So, and then if we zoom out, maybe it looks a little too much like bones, but I think with the drooping effect, I think it came out okay. And of course, you would never know exactly how it's going to look until you actually have a physical model in front of you that you put together. That's when sometimes it can look kind of disappointing compared to, it doesn't always look as good or detailed as on the screen. So, but that's another reason, just keep plowing through it though, because sometimes the details you want to see just don't show up in quite as grandiose fashion as you had in mind. So now I want to actually change the color of all the mast areas and whatnot. So I think I'll keep some of the stuff, but I think I'm going to delete these fittings. I feel like with the curse, I don't think they need the fittings. I'm actually going to make the spars like a really dark reddish black brown color. So, and one thing you can do, you can actually, I haven't played around with this much, but you can change the background color. So I could go mast port, or mast starboard, sorry, as the shape outline, and I could make it like the color of like sky or something, but I haven't really done that too much yet. It looks kind of crazy. You could do like a sky blue or something. It just kind of looks weird compared to what we're used to with the black color. I might make it like a grayish color. So that way, I wanted to make the mast itself, I wanted to make the mast black. So I think I will do like a gray, like a dark gray, so the mast can maybe actually appear as black, and maybe do gray for the background. So maybe, yeah, that actually could make sense, because then the curse with them, maybe they bring stormy weather with them, with like gray, dark clouds and whatnot. So I think I'll try that and see how that goes. I'm going to go ahead and do that with mast port here too, just before I go back to the other editing of the sails and whatnot and the mast color. Because I'm basically going to copy mast starboard up in the mast and sails layer, and then duplicate it to make the other side. So, all right, so now we get back into the mast parts themselves. So we've got the bowsprit, jib boom. Yeah, I think I'm gonna make all these like a dark color. I might make them like slightly different colors, and then the bottom of the mast, there's all these like little extra parts that you could delete if you wanted to, or you could like really radically change. But like base of mast, that one I can't really see with the die there, so I'm just going to delete that one in this particular case. And then here I think I'll keep that like a dark color. Base detail, mast support, so that's for the bottom part. I'll make that a dark color as well. This is one of those things where the details probably won't show up on the ship all that much. This one I want to delete. I actually don't want these lines here. So I'm going to go ahead and delete all the fitting lines. They make more sense for a historical ship, but in this case, I don't really want those to show up. So I think I'll do a really dark grayish color, or maybe this dark reddish brown color for the mast. Yeah, I think that looks good. And then the boom and the gaff, I think I'll do very similar or the same with those. Yeah, that looks better. Yeah, I wanted like more of a dark skeletal look for the mast itself. And now we have some color contrast between the mast and the actual bandages that make up the sails. And I think that does look better. So, all right. I could add more rigging so that the sails are more attached to the jib boom and stuff like that, but I don't think it really needs it. We do have some lines. It's just, those are the type of things that are going to get cut out in the final design anyway, when you make the cuts or when you do the decals. So not going to worry about that too much. So now we're going to go ahead. We got starboard side. That whole thing is selected. And now I'm going to duplicate that with Control D. And now the duplicate is on top. So before I rename it and flip it, I'm going to go ahead and move this over here. So now I'm going to do a flip, horizontal flip over here. And then I'm going to turn snapping on. I might not need it, but yeah, see, so now I can snap it line midpoint to line midpoint. So I can angle it there. And now this port side underneath, we can delete that. We don't need that anymore. And now starboard side is now port side. So I'm going to drag it underneath. I usually like to have the fronts of the cards left to right align top to bottom in the layers panel. So this way the starboard side of the mast is above the port side, which I'm going to rename right now, in the layers. All right, and there's different ways you could organize it. You could do even more subfolders and do like C1F, C1B for card one front, card one back, but I don't think it's really necessary in this case, especially when there's only one card. It's not as confusing. So I think the one thing I'm kind of not liking about this showing up right now is this top bandage. The color is a little too bright at the top, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to edit the gradient manually. So I think I'm going to change the top color to something darker, basically. So this one, you can just delete that one. Oh yeah, that's perfect. I think I'm just going to delete the top gradient. I might make this top one a little bit lighter. Yeah, that looks perfect. And then I just got to do that over here too. So let me go ahead and find that. Sometimes just by clicking like a ton of times really fast on the object you want, it drills down through all the folders and layers to get to that spot. So sometimes control works good, but sometimes I just click like crazy until I have the thing selected that I want. So, all right. I think that it's turning out okay. It looks a little different than I wanted it to, but it's not too bad. And the nice thing about editing these clipped paths is that if I wanted to change the shape of this, it's pretty easy. So here you can't edit the nodes once it's already clipped. You would have to go in and edit these things, or what I was going to do, basically showing, let me get back to the other side of the mast here. Let me get out of that path back into here, jib sail bandages. So if I right click over in the layers panel on jib sail bandages, I can hit release clip, and then I think I want to do this anyway. I think I want to hide this one. So this one I might as well hide. I don't really need that one. And then if I wanted to, I think I'm not going to bother, but if I wanted to, I can edit the nodes of this clipping path. So now I could make this curve, for example, less extreme, have it be less curved there. And now if I go back to my select tool with S, have both the folder and the clipping path selected again, object clip, set clip, and now it has it look like that. So I think, I don't know which one looks better, because here you can see the edges of the bandages more, but it makes less sense where they're like, they don't have a hard line connecting them. So I think I'm not going to do that. It's kind of debatable. Either way, it could look fine. I think I might edit it a little bit more, actually. I think I want to go into this here and yank it over so I can maybe have a little bit more. I want a little bit less of a curved line, I think. So I'm gonna drag that whole group over, redo the clip, and now I've got it like that. So I think I like that a little bit better. You could leave it, I think I might leave it like this, even though it's blowing out more on the port side. It almost could look like that. So I guess I think I'll just paste it back over. Yeah, I'm gonna duplicate this and add it to this side actually. So you could mirror this and do this one separately, and then you see how I can easily change. I can basically modify how each sail looks and change it with like very specific parameters. So, all right, so jib sail bandages. So now this is the port side. So we're gonna delete that one, and then that one's up there. Drag that down. All right, I think I like that curve a little better. I think it looks better with the bandage design. Okay, cool. So that's most of the sail and mast design for this one. Again, a lot of times it'll be quicker and you won't have to mess with things quite as much. So one thing that I think I want to change quite a bit, I think there's still too much orange on this main deck top. I think the pattern is probably okay. I might go a little bit lighter on this. Yeah, I'm going to go a little lighter. I feel like there's too much orange that's showing through on that. And then I'm going to go to main deck top where we have the actual gradient. And I'm going to, yeah, this is just way too orange. I don't know. The more I zoom out and the more I see it over and over again, the less I like it. I want it to look more like a little bit more desert look. So I'm going to basically make less saturation and more lightness generally on the edges. Yeah, more of a desert sandy look. So probably a little, yeah, I might do a little darker than that actually, just because of like I said, my printer, it always turns out lighter than what I see on the screen. So, and then I think I might do a slight edit to the deck and hull art. That's one thing I did on accident. If you click where these 3 dots are over on the layers panel, or the right side panel, it'll go away completely. So instead of having to drag it over, but I pretty much always like this visible because I'm always working with stuff here. A lot of times it's easier to select something in the layers panel and then edit it straight from there like I'm doing right now, rather than trying to click into it and it selects, the entire group or whatever. So, all right, starboard hull outside, I'm going to adjust this gradient slightly. I feel like I'm still seeing green in the yellow. It still looks a little bit funky. Yeah, I want it to look a little bit more of like a desert color and almost like a bone white. I think that'll match with the bandage sail design a lot better too. So I'm gonna rename this gradient Mastaba hull, and that way when I go, because this way I'm just gonna edit the gradient, edit this other one with port hull outside. I'm not gonna duplicate it and redo that mirror switch. I'm just gonna go in here, click Mastaba hull, and then there we go. So sometimes that's an easier, faster way to do it than duplicating and mirroring like a hull side. So, and then I'm gonna save it. It's good to save often. I think that does most of it for this ship. Of course, I don't know how it's going to turn out, if it's going to look the way I want it to, but that's always kind of what happens when you print it. It won't turn out quite exactly as you had imagined usually. And then I'm just going to make a couple small edits to the deck artwork. I think I don't want this grate here. But I think I do want the barrels to stick around and disable snapping so I can just move them however I want. I think I'm going to make a few extras actually. Just control, copy, paste. I think I'm going to make, I think I'm going to make a few extra barrels. Sometimes I change the rotation so that they don't look like they're all facing in the same direction, but that's one of those details that's really hard to see on the final model. So it's really not all that necessary. I'm actually going to, this is kind of a weird way to hack this cannon. It looks a little darker than I want, so I'm just going to change the opacity. It's such a small detail that normally you would go in and make the actual colors lighter, but this is only, actually this is an object. Okay. I thought it was just a picture, but it is a full cannon, but I'm just going to make the opacity lighter. Sometimes that's like an easy way to kind of hack little tiny details so you don't have to go in and edit a ton of colors and change a bunch of things when you can just do it a little bit more quickly this way. I think I'm gonna make them a tiny bit bigger too. I'm fine if like they're irregular shapes. That would be kind of interesting. Or if they were different sizes. I think I'll keep them mostly the same, but yeah, I think this is, since it's a weird cursed ship, I'm gonna kind of change the look a little bit so that the cannons are gonna be not symmetrical from one side to another. This one's gonna be pointing a little bit off to the stern, for example. So just little changes like that I like to make. And then we've got the gunwales. There's all these little details that you can go kind of crazy on. Usually I don't worry about it too much. So this one is just a stroke. One big thing for editing stroke and fill is when you select the colors down here, if you don't hold shift, it'll change the fill. But if you hold shift down, it'll change the stroke. So that's actually one of the best tips that I got early on with doing these edits and designs, is changing fill and stroke by just holding shift. So that way you can change the stroke and keep the fill empty. So, which is what I want in this case. I think that's probably a little too dark actually. I don't want it green though. Yeah, let me do, I'm thinking like a dark gray for the gunwales. Yeah, that's fine. And yeah, or kind of like a regular gray. Yeah, I think that looks decent. And I think that's most of it. I think I'm just going to change the cannons a tiny bit. So I'm going to go over cannons in detail with the how to make an artwork template video. That'll be a lot more detailed on this stuff. Sometimes on the artwork templates, you might see cannons that are like just pictures, or they're just patterns or paths or whatever, and you can't edit the individual cannons. In this one, we do have cannons on hull that are, all the parts are separate. So you can go in and change everything about this. You can change the muzzle, you can change the color of the cannon metal. Here I'm just going to change the gradient on the gun port basically. So I'm going to make it like, I think I'm going to try a brownish gun port. For some reason it seems like it's not letting me, which is weird, but okay, cool. All right, there we go. Nice. Yeah, I think I'm going to swap this gradient a little bit. Usually I like to have the gun port gradients go from top to bottom. So I'm going to change, let me get back to, let me try. Yeah, I think that brown one looks fine. Okay, so now we can go into the gradient tool and we can change the line direction. So that way we can get it to look more like what I'm looking for. So, and then now I can rename this gradient. I can do Mastaba gunport lid. And you can name that gradient exactly the way you want to. And then I'm basically going to go in and just change these other ones real quick. So yeah, for some reason it's not letting me edit. Sometimes there's weird issues with gradients. I don't know why. Sometimes it doesn't let you edit them as quickly as you would expect, but Inkscape can be a little bit glitchy sometimes. But if you use something like Adobe Illustrator, a lot of these things work very similar or almost the same. So, and then I'm just going to go ahead and do the same thing for these other two gun port lids. And like I said, I'll go over how I make like cannon patterns and like entire gun decks all at once in the video about how to make a full template. All right, another thing I wanted to go over in a different file is how to use textures and applying them to parts of the ship. So this is a Tent Master file I have up, and what you're seeing here, this big black and white thing, is basically a TIFF texture, and there's a lot of different ones you can get online, I'm sure, or you can make your own actually. So it's basically generally a grayscale thing that you can apply as a mask in order to add like a texture to a design. So I'm going to use it right now to cut out chunks of a sail that's underneath. So if we hide this image, I've got basically mast 4 sails, and looks like it's hiding both at the same time for some reason. But anyway, but normally it would look kind of like these gray and red sails on the right, but without that stuff cut out. But this is a cursed ship and pretty evil, so I don't want it to look all clean and new like it was launched today or anything. So we're gonna have the texture on top, so, and then the sail path underneath it. So you see mast 4 sails there. We have both selected already. So now I'm gonna go to Object, Mask, Set Mask, and there you see it basically punches out the areas where it's dark, and then the gray kind of fades through a little bit, and then the white areas, it leaves it as is. So that's a really easy way, depending on the texture you're using, to basically make something look weathered or make it have holes in it, things like that. So in this case, I have I still have a black shape outline beneath the sail area. So this is, when you're using something like this, a lot of times you'll want to do that, where you have a black outline with solid black fill underneath. So that way, when I go to mast 4 front here, if I didn't have that, I'm going to turn that off, I'm going to hide that, it would basically punch through, and then you see the card background behind. But I don't really want that. You could try that depending on your card background, if it has like a sky color maybe, but in this case, I just want like a black background to look like there's holes in the sails. And one of the nice things about that is that you can, when you mirror these, when you duplicate and mirror them to drag them to the other side, generally the same holes should show up in the same spots where it makes sense, like port to starboard. So let's say, for example, I've got these two holes you can see there on the middle sail, the top sail of this mast, and those are on the starboard side of the ship, because this is the front of the mast. You can see that the battens and the sails are on top of the mast in terms of this layer, and so that's essentially the starboard side. And then if we go over here, it's a little confusing because the mast is upside down, and then over here you can see it's on the other side, which is still the starboard side. So that way, with the mirroring, it works out really well. So the holes actually make sense. So it's not, symmetrical in the wrong direction, basically. So that's just a quick little tip on applying textures to a path, so you can make something look weathered, punch holes in it, and all sorts of other stuff. Okay, so back in the Mastaba file, I think I'm actually gonna apply a texture to the mummy bandages. I think they look a little too clean, so I think I'm gonna do that in this ship file as well. So I've got the jib sail and the mainsail bandages. Those two folders, I'm gonna group them together as one, and just name it sails. And then I'm gonna drag in a texture, and we're gonna work on applying that. So I'm gonna try this one, I believe, and it's pretty easy to just apply different ones, and then you can just see which one you like best. So, and then basically where this is over the top of it, that's what's going to cut through. So that's why I shrank it down a little bit, because I want to get some of that effect on there. I'm going to try like that. And then, so I have image selected, it's on top in the layers panel over on the right. It's above the sails, and I'm going to hold Control, click the sails folder, that new folder that I grouped those two sails with together. And then same thing, object, mask, set mask. And now we can see it's kind of punched through a little bit for a little bit of a slightly damaged look. And I don't think I'd like that one, so I'm gonna undo that with Control Z and find. I think I'm gonna try to find a texture that I like better for the bandages. All right, I'm gonna go with more of a circular dot effect with the texturing. So I've got a new one in here. It's already selected. Control click Sails, and then go to Object, Mask, Set Mask, and that punches through. Yeah, I think that looks a little better. It's more like Canon or Grape Shot that cut through some of those bandages, give it a little bit of a weathered look. So I think I'll try that. So now I'm gonna basically, this is on the starboard side of the mast. So to have this be symmetrical the way I want it to be on the other side, instead of applying, you could apply a mask separately, that same texture to this side, but getting it to line up perfectly would be difficult and kind of annoying. I'd rather just duplicate it and then drag it over it and match them up. So I'm gonna duplicate that sails folder. I'm gonna drag it down on the port side underneath mast, right above jib sail bandages. Actually, before I do that, let me undo. Before I do that, I want to basically, because when you do that, it's going to be underneath the original, but then I still haven't moved it, so it's going to move the wrong one basically. So I'm going to go ahead, get into the top sails folder. There we go. Sometimes you just have to double click to get inside the selection you want. And then in this case, I'm going to mirror it, or object flip horizontal, basically a mirroring effect. And then here we can turn on snapping real quick, and that should make it real easy to line this up, boom, until you see the nodes line up. And then we've got our symmetrical look pretty much. Let's see, I think that's better. There we go. Now it's perfect. So, and now we can drag the sails part down to port side under mast right there. And then we can delete the stuff underneath. And there we have it. So, and now in this case, when you see like that bigger hole right there, that's going to match up on the other side. So it looks like it's actually going straight through on both sides of the sail. All right, so now I'm going to go over the name and text stuff a tiny bit. So I've got the ship name on both sides of the hull, of course. You can do all kinds of stuff with this. It's really easy to manipulate the text. I might actually try changing the font a little bit. It looks like this one is locked. So this one must not be. Oh, okay. It's a clone. That's why. Okay. So that's kind of like user preference. I made it a clone just so it's easier to mess with from the top. So if you change the Mastaba name up in the stats layer, then you'll see the rest of it, the other ones change as well, but it's going to keep the same font and everything. So if I want to change the font, I'm going to have to delete these ones because they're just clones, and then I'll make basically a text box where I type it out and then can apply effects to it. And what I'm probably going to do is I'm probably going to basically duplicate it to get it onto the other hull, because usually it's best to, when you know you need something on both sides of a part, like both sides of the hull, it's better to just edit one to your liking and then duplicate it and line it up on the other part, rather than, you know, trying to make the same exact edits to both pieces. So I think I still probably want black fill. Here it gets interesting because you can apply a stroke. So if I hold down shift and then let's say I want like a dark purple fill, I'm going to click down through some color options and then hold control and click one of these colors, go back to the select tool, and you can see it's got like a purple outline there. So, and it's got 70% opacity, but I'm gonna jack that up to 100. Okay, so I think that looks kind of interesting. I think the stroke is a little bit too I think to me it's a little bit too thick. So you can go over the fill and stroke panel, go to stroke style, width is 0.1 millimeter. I might go to 0.05 millimeter. Try something like that. I might make the middle part a little bit different. Yeah, this is interesting. That's actually, that looks better than I thought it would. I don't know that I want purple, but I think I might try something kind of unique like that. I don't know for sure. But, and then here, once you have this, of course, you can change the font selection to whatever you want, basically. So you can start typing letters, and then all sorts of fonts will come up. So for the curse, I might do something a little bit different. Might do something other than win last. That's just the default I have for the templates generally, but of course you can use whatever you want. So I think I'm actually going to go with a font called Papyrus, which kind of works with the Egyptian theme that I've had so far. And I'm actually going to change the font spacing a little bit. So here, I think I was just experimenting a little bit with it. I think I like -1. So I'm going to make the letters a little bit closer together. And I think I'm going to angle this a little bit too. So when it's selected and then you click once more, you can change the rotation. So I think I might do something like this. Yeah, I think I like that. I think I'll keep the size. It's tempting to make it smaller. Like, it seems like it might look too big, but then of course when you zoom out and you realize how small this ship is actually going to be, if you make it much smaller, you probably won't be able to read it at all. So, and then now I'm basically going to duplicate that and then bring it over here. And then to get similar rotational effect, I'll just rotate it twice over here. Actually, I'm just going to rotate it. I'm just going to rotate it manually. Sometimes I just do it manually to kind of eyeball it. All right. And then we've got ship name on both sides in kind of a unique font. And of course, you don't always have to have the ship name on the side. There's actually a chance I'm not going to keep that. I don't know if I really like having the ship name on this one, but we'll see. Could put like a stern gallery or windows there instead, but I don't think I'm gonna worry about that one or that for this one. So now we're pretty much done. There might be some edits to the final ship that I make separate from the video, but basically the last thing I want to make sure I go over for this one is getting the cards exported. So I'm going to save this file. The SVG file with both cards is basically done, but we can still export the cards. So I'm going to unlock cut outlines, and then there's a couple different ways to do this. What you can do is just select everything, make sure there's nothing that's locked, and then like card background is locked, so that means it's not going to be selected. But if I unlock that and then go back over here, and then I go to this export function over there, you can basically say export selected only, which it looks like it excluded something there that was locked. So I'm just going to keep it. I'm just going to have it like that. And then you can choose any folder location on your computer and export it as a PNG or as an SVG if you wanted to. Usually I do PNGs for the cards. And then you'll have your card all finished. So the other thing you can do is go to card outlines and basically use this for a digital cut. So this is something that you don't really need to do, but this is something I do to make the decaled deck plates. Is basically you can have this selected, and then let me make sure all these are minimized here so I can select all of them easily. So actually I'm probably just gonna select everything. Let me see here. Yeah, so I'm gonna click stats, hold shift, and then go back up and then highlight everything in between there. And then I can also highlight card outlines. And now I can do my clipping, and it's going to cut out that background. So now instead of the hard edge card background, now we have the rounded edges. So that's really nice. And then from there, we can do kind of the same thing that I was just talking about, where we can export one card at a time. And then we can name this, for example, like C1F for card one front. like maybe Mastaba C1F.png, and then you can just hit enter and it'll export it. So, and then that'll export the card at this actual size. So, and it looks like it's a tiny bit bigger for some reason, so I'd probably just shrink that down or something. But anyway, this pretty much sums it up, how to make ship artwork in Inkscape. I think I'm going to have more videos because I'm sure there's other topics and other techniques or whatnot that I've either used or will use in the future that I wasn't able to cover in this one. But for now, this serves as like the main base tutorial for how to make ship artwork in Inkscape. Hope you enjoyed it. Feel free to leave a like, comment below, and any questions, feel free to ask them, and check out new products at the Pirates of Ben store. Thanks for watching.